Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is chaosdrive and I'm making a game. It's a cyberpunk themed metroidvania with a large focus on story. If you haven't seen my first devlog, where I covered the player movement, I recommend watching that first. I also listed some of my inspirations and just talked a little bit more about my background with creating games. Well, without further ado, let's get into the devlog. In this devlog, I'm going to be focusing on player combat. By this I mean attacking. I'm not going to be covering enemies in this devlog because the player attacks took up enough time to warrant their own video. So, let me explain my vision for the combat in this game. I wanted there to be many different weapons that the player could choose from. There will be ranged weapons like guns in this game, but I won't be covering that in this devlog. Obviously, it's not very realistic to try to make separate attack animations for each weapon, so I decided I would design different weapon types and make an animation for each weapon type as a whole. So I settled on 3 different types for the game at this point. The first type is going to be a slashing type. This type has a standard speed and range. This is going to be swords, crowbars, bats, really anything that you would swing. The second type is a stabbing type. This type has a slower speed but longer range. This is going to be your spears, javelins, tridents, you get the idea. Third type is a dagger type. This type has a very short range but a very fast attack speed. This is going to consist of mostly daggers and knives. There will almost certainly be more weapon types in the future, but I decided to start small as I create the basic systems of the game. So the first thing I did was plan the animations for the first weapon type, slashing type. I didn't want it to just repeat the same attack animation each time, because that's boring. I wanted it to go through a combo of attack animations depending on how many times you attack in a row. For this type, I planned out a 4 attack combo, which meant 4 different animations. First, the player would slash straight across. Then, the player would slash back. Then, an upward slash. And then he will bring it back with a downward slash. So I jumped right into Spine. This is where I'm doing all of the character animations for my game. I'm still an amateur with the program, but I've been animating as a hobby for quite a while now. To be honest, the animating is the most time-consuming part of this process. It takes a lot of messing around to get a natural-looking attack animation. It also takes a bit of imagination to try to picture what it will look like in-game while you're animating it. The way I meshed the 4 animations together seamlessly is I copied the ending pose of the player in the first animation and started the character in that pose for the second attack animation, and so on. Once I was satisfied with my animations, there was one more thing I needed to do before jumping into GameMaker Studio. In animations that depict quick movements, adding a speed smear or slash to show the path of the fast-moving object can improve the look by a lot. In many video games, this technique is used especially for attacks. So before implementing the code, I opened up Sprite and got to work on some slash animations. Sprite is my go-to program for pixel art. Its tools and layout just make everything really convenient. The slashes took a while to get right, and I still might change them in the future, but for now they look good enough. Finally, with all my assets ready, I imported them all to GameMaker Studio and started coding. I wanted to create a system where I could input a certain speed, size, knockback, and damage depending on which animation is playing. Like the final hit of the sword combo should do more damage and knockback than the first hit. Since there are no enemies in the game yet, I created a makeshift dummy object so that I would have something to try the attacks on. This is what the final sword attacks look like in-game. Looks good. On to the next one. The stabbing type was next. For this weapon type, I designed a 3-hit combo, since this weapon is a little bit slower, has more range, and will generally deal more damage per hit. For the first hit, the player will simply stab forward. Then, with the second hit, the player will swipe upward. And the third, the player will slam downward. The second and third attacks are pretty similar to the sword's third and fourth attacks, but they will have different speeds and specific animations. Before going into Spine to animate, I needed to make a stabbing type weapon, so I opened up Sprite again and made a weapon. I think the name of this specific type of weapon is a Crescent Moon Spade. I decided to make all of the first weapons look like plain wood and metal because the starting weapons won't be very good. Once I had the weapon ready, it was time to jump back into Spine and start the animating process. This was time consuming as always. It's always pretty hard to try to figure out poses to make the animation look smooth. There's a couple times that I would have to get up from my desk and act out the attacks myself to try to figure out the natural movements. I was pretty proud of the animations in the end though. Once I had the animations done, I got started in GameMaker Studio. Implementing the weapon type into the game didn't take very long at all, because I already created the basic attack code when I implemented the first weapon type. So, after a little bit of testing and editing values, this is what the final product looks like for the stabbing type weapon. I really like how dramatic the attacks look. I think it's definitely going to contribute to the overall feel of the game. I was pretty proud of what I had so far, but I still had one more weapon type to create, the Dagger weapon type. The combo I designed for this type was the simplest of all of them. It was a 2-hit combo. The first hit would be a slash across, and the second hit would be a slash back. The catch with this weapon type though is that the attacks would repeat endlessly, so if you keep spamming the attack button, the combo could just keep going. Because of this, I'm probably going to implement some kind of stamina system later on so that you can't just keep attacking. But for this type of weapon with low damage, it's going to have a very fast attack speed and endless hits in a row, as long as the stamina allows for it. So after designing the combo, I jumped into Sprite to make the art for the first dagger. I used the same colors that I did with the sword and the spade. It was pretty simple and only took a couple minutes. When I was done with that, I opened up Spine to create the 2 animations. To be honest, I thought this was going to be easy. I didn't think it would take long to make 2 animations that just repeated after one another, but this actually took me the longest out of all the weapon types. I had to revise this so many times because I wanted the attack to be fast. I wanted it to happen almost instantaneously after the attack button is hit. So trying to make a smooth animation that is that fast was very hard. I fought at this for about an hour, and then I had an idea, that I could just let the sword slash effects in-game show the player the path of the blade, and I could just start the animations on the attack frame so it looked very fast and also natural. After finally settling, I put it into GameMaker Studio and here's how it turned out. Creating the basic combat system took a lot of work and time, but I'm pretty proud of how it turned out and I have high hopes for the fighting in this game. This was a pretty big devlog as far as development goes and I made a ton of great progress. If you made it to the end here, thank you for watching and stay tuned for devlog number 3.